37,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. 296 souls on board, and in the back of the plane, a flight attendant named Elena Ramirez was folding a little boy's blanket, humming a quiet lullaby under her breath. The kid in seat 32A had finally stopped crying. For the first time in hours, things felt peaceful. Then the engines went quiet. Not the dramatic kind of quiet you see in movies. Something worse. The absence of a sound you'd stop noticing, the way you only realize your heart has been beating your whole life the moment it skips. Elena Ramirez was the kind of person you looked right past on a long flight. 51 years old, silver threading through her dark braid, shoulders rounded from decades of reaching into overhead bins. She wore her Pacific Horizon Airlines uniform the way she did everything, quietly, neatly, with a competence nobody clocked. Passengers smiled at her the way they smile at good hotel staff, grateful in the moment, already forgetting her face before the drink cart was back in its alcove. "Elena, sweetheart, could you warm this bottle one more time?" That was Mrs. Delgado from 14 degrees Celsius, the tone people reserve for women who serve them. Elena gave her the same soft smile she'd been perfecting for 23 years, took the bottle, tested the temperature on her wrist, the way she always did, and brought it back with a small joke about how even babies get jet lag. She had the kind of competence that disappears into itself. People never saw it. That was the point. Only once, late in the flight, alone in the dim light of the forward galley, did something else show through. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small metal compass, old and worn, scratched glass face, a faded inscription on the back. "Para siempre, mija." Her thumb traced the letters slowly, and for a moment her eyes weren't on the cabin at all. They were somewhere far below. Red dirt, endless sky. A man's voice saying her name like it mattered. Then she tucked it away, smoothed her skirt, and went back to checking seatbelts. The compass had belonged to her father. Captain Rafael Ramirez had spent his life flying crop dusters and bush planes across the American Southwest, right up until his liver gave out. He taught Elena to fly the way some fathers teach their daughters to drive, reluctantly at first, then with a fierce, almost desperate love, especially after her brother Miguel died in a small plane crash when she was 24. First training flight, dawn in the California desert. A Cessna 172 smelling of oil and dust and Old Spice. Rafi looked at her and said, "You think flying is romance, mija? It's not. It's mathematics, and fear, and knowing your hands better than you know your own heart." She hated it. The yoke fighting her, the stall horn screaming when she pulled too hard, her father's voice going from gentle to razor-sharp in a single breath. Again, always, again. "You're thinking like a passenger. Be the plane." There were fights. Her mother screaming in the kitchen that this was dangerous. Elena herself storming off the tarmac more than once, tears down her face, swearing she'd never touch another yoke. But she always came back, because her father would be standing by the plane at sunset, compass in hand, saying quietly, "The sky doesn't care if you're scared, Elena, but it will respect you if you show up anyway." One afternoon stuck with her above all the rest. Engine out procedures over empty desert. Rafi pulled the throttle to idle at 2,000 feet. The world went silent. The plane felt like a stone tied to a string. "When will I ever need this?" Elena shouted over the wind noise, hands shaking on the controls. Her father's answer came low and certain. "You won't, until the day you do. And on that day, dead engines don't mean dead pilots. They just mean you have to listen harder to everything else." She managed the glide, made the turn, landed hard enough to rattle her teeth. Rafi looked at her with something close to peace in his eyes, the first time she'd seen that look since Miguel's funeral. He died 3 years later. Elena folded up her flying hours like old photographs and put them away. Became a flight attendant because she still loved the sky, just didn't need to be in the front anymore. The compass stayed in her pocket every single flight, a private ritual. Nobody knew. She never corrected the passengers who assumed she knew nothing beyond safety demos and drink service. Easier that way. This was Flight TP-319, Los Angeles to Auckland. A Boeing 787-9 cruising at 37,000 feet. Flight level 370, Mach .84. somewhere over the deepest, emptiest stretch of ocean on Earth. Night had settled in fully. The kind of night that makes the sky feel like it's pressing down instead of opening up. Elena eased into the jump seat near the rear of the plane, buckled in, closed her eyes for what she expected to be 20 quiet minutes. Something stirred in the back of her mind, an old instinct lifting its head at a distant sound. She told herself it was nothing. Then she put her hand flat against the seat back and held it there. A faint, irregular shudder through the floor, like a missed heartbeat. She let it go. In the cockpit, Captain David Okoro and First Officer Lena Kowalski were in a quiet debate about Auckland coffee. David, 48, broad-shouldered, deliberate, the kind of captain who kept a small Nigerian flag pin on his flight bag. Lena, 32, sharp as fresh wire, still proving herself after a rough check ride 6 months back. They worked well together. He never talked down to her. She never pretended she had all the answers. Seriously, Captain, the place near the viaduct does a flat white that could wake the dead. Last time I trusted your coffee recommendation, I was up 30 hours straight. A caution message flickered across the EI keys. The crew alerting system, something about fuel flow imbalance. David ran the checklist. Minor, seen it before. Lena logged it anyway. Everything looked fine. But not everything that looks fine is fine. The left engine rolled back first. No bang, no explosion, a drop in RPM, and a chime. David's hands moved through the memory items automatically. Lena confirmed the readings. They ran the checklist. Fuel flow looked odd but seemed recoverable. Elena was walking past the forward galley when she felt the change in her bones before the seatbelt sign even came on. Her hand found the compass without her realizing it. Then, stage 2 hit. The right engine began losing power. The cockpit shifted from routine to serious in 30 seconds. David's PA was calm and professional. Passengers should return to their seats. Lena's hands stayed steady on the controls. Her breathing had changed. They declared a pan-pan to oceanic control. Still flying, still in control. Elena stood in the aft galley, watching the cabin change. People exchanged glances. Quiet prayers started. Then both engines flamed out within 90 seconds of each other. The 787 became a glider. 296 people, descending at 2,000 feet per minute. Silent, over black water. David's voice went out on the radio. Mayday, Mayday, Pacific Horizon 319, dual engine failure. The cabin filled with a sound that wasn't screaming. Not yet. A collective intake of breath so sharp, it felt like the plane itself was gasping. Elena moved forward through the aisle without being asked. Her body remembered rhythms trained into it 20 years ago. She reached the flight deck door just as the senior purser was arguing against the lock. Seconds. Speak up and expose everything she had buried for 2 decades. Stay silent and watch 296 people die quietly over black water. Her hands were shaking. Dead engines don't mean dead pilots. She chose. The door opened for emergency access. Elena stepped in. 1 sentence. No explanation. I can help? David stared at her. Ma'am, I appreciate the thought, but... That's sweet, Lena said gently, already turning back to her instruments. But we need to focus. Elena didn't argue. She reached past Lena and pointed to a specific standby instrument. The old analog attitude indicator, still running on its own battery. Your primary attitude is lying. Look at the standby. Shallow left bank. You can't see it on the glass. Correct 5 degrees right or we'll lose the glide. David's eyes moved to the standby. He made the correction. The descent rate stabilized. Lena's voice went tight. Absolutely not. Step aside. You are not trained for this. But the restart sequence was failing. The contamination readings weren't making sense. The plane was getting heavier as it descended into warmer, denser air. Elena spoke precisely. Without theater. The contamination is in the wing tanks. You're seeing it on fuel quantity but not temperature. The probes are downstream. Cross-feed from the center tank manually while we still have battery. Then attempt the restart at 12,000 instead of 25. The book assumes clean fuel. She reached for the overhead panel without waiting. 2 switches. Calm hands. the movements of someone who had done this in a rattling Cessna over desert scrub while her father watched with his arms folded. The engine instruments twitched. David watched her hands. He noticed the small compass she'd set on the glare shield like a talisman. His jaw worked for a moment, the weight of a man choosing between two kinds of catastrophe. "All right." Voice rough. "Right seat. Lena, back her up. I'll fly." Elena moved toward the seat. On the tray table beside her, a child's crayon drawing. A plane with big wings and a smiling sun. A name written carefully in uneven letters at the bottom. She kept moving. The moment she settled into the right seat, reality came down on her, all at once. The yoke was heavier than anything she'd trained on. The cockpit smelled of warm electronics and fear. Her hands were clammy on the smooth plastic. Outside, the black Pacific waited. Instruments glowed in emergency red and amber, and the silence where two engines should have been roaring, that was the loudest sound she had ever heard in her life. "Tell me what you see, Captain." Voice steadier than her pulse. David gave her the numbers. Altitude, 28,000 and falling, airspeed bleeding, outside air temperature rising as they descended into denser air. No suitable runways within glide range. The nearest option, a tiny atoll airstrip, 180 miles away. Marginal at best. Elena closed her eyes for half a second. Listen harder to everything else. We try to light the left engine at 12,000, center tank crossfeed. We isolate the automation and go manual on everything we still have access to. I'll call the numbers. You fly best glide. Lena, read me fuel temperatures every 500 feet. They began. Every 100 feet was a negotiation with physics. David's hands were steady on the yoke. His jaw worked silently. Lena's voice grew tighter as she called out data. Elena worked the overhead panel with movements that looked almost too slow for the stakes, but were exactly right. She could feel her father's hand over hers, guiding the mixture control in a dead Cessna over desert scrub. 14,000 feet. The left engine spooled up, briefly, then coughed and died. A passenger scream carried faintly through the closed door. "Again," Elena said. "We're close. The center tank is cleaner." The second attempt failed worse. David's voice cracked. "We're not going to make it like this." Then, the right engine, which had been windmilling uselessly, seized completely. Total loss of thrust. The 787 was a pure glider now, heavy, unforgiving, committed. Alarms sounded in cascades. Cabin pressure began dropping as systems gave out one by one. Elena stared at the standby instruments. She ran through every training flight, every dead stick landing, every time her father had made her repeat a maneuver until her hands blistered. And then, not from any checklist, something Rafi had told her once about flying through a sandstorm with clogged fuel lines. You use whatever you have left, and then you use something else, on chance. She said it quietly. We pull power from the APU, the auxiliary power unit, everything it is left, and attempt a restart outside normal parameters. It is not procedure, but procedure already failed. We do it at 9,000 feet. David, I need you to rock the wings on my call. Gently. It may slosh enough contaminated fuel to clear the line for 3 seconds. Silence in the cockpit. It's not in any manual, she said. Neither is where we are right now. David looked at Lena. Lena looked at the instruments. Do it, David said. The APU came online with a groan. Elena called the sequence. David rocked the wings, a terrible motion at this altitude over open ocean. Passengers screamed through the door. 5 seconds. Nothing. Then the left engine began to spool. Slowly. Unevenly. Like something dragged back from the dead. It caught. Rough and coughing, but it caught. The nose lifted slightly. The descent rate cut in half. The atoll was now theoretically within reach, if they managed the glide perfectly and the engine held. The final approach was the hardest thing Elena had ever done. The short runway appeared as a faint string of lights against black water. Crosswind, limited visibility, the left engine coughing every few seconds like it was deciding whether to quit. David flew. Elena called speeds and corrections. Lena worked the radios, oceanic control clearing traffic that didn't exist, just to give them space and a voice on the frequency that wasn't silence. 500 feet. The engine surged, then died again. They were committed. No going around. The touchdown was ugly. The 787 hit the runway hard, bounced once, then settled with a groan of stressed metal. The thrust reverser on the one working engine screamed. Tires smoked. The plane rolled long, drifting left. But it stopped. Silence. 10 full seconds of nothing but breathing and the tick of cooling metal. Outside, the Pacific whispered against a distant reef. Inside, 296 people were still alive. Elena's hands would not stop shaking. She tried to unbuckle and nearly dropped the clasp twice. Her legs were water when she finally stood. She braced one hand on the glare shield and looked down at the compass sitting there. Scratched glass, worn brass, the inscription she knew without reading it. David looked at her across the center console. No words, just a slow nod, the kind that passes between two people who have seen the edge together and come back from it. Lena reached over and squeezed Elena's shoulder once. Hard. Said nothing. Her eyes were wet. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin erupted. Not panic, release. Pure, overwhelming release. The Samoan grandfather in 19D wept openly, holding his grandson. The Korean businesswoman laughed in shaky, disbelieving bursts and embraced the complete stranger next to her. And the little boy in 32A looked up at his mother, perfectly calm, and asked if they could do that again, because, quote, that was really bumpy but fun. Elena slipped the compass back into her pocket. She felt its familiar weight settle against her side. The sky doesn't care if you're scared, but it will respect you if you show up anyway.